Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on set.
This is episode 7 of our 10-part Oscar series, so we're in the home stretch. Each episode features a panel of film industry professionals discussing the nominees in their category of expertise. And today, we're talking about film editing. Let me introduce my guests. Christopher Angel, writer, director, editor, and it's your third year discussing the Oscars with us. Welcome back.
Thanks, Skid. So glad to be back.
Also happy to welcome Amy Duddleston, film editor. And while it's your first time on our Oscar panel, you're no stranger to the podcast. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, and nice to meet you, Chris.
Hello, Amy.
Listeners, if you're curious about our panel and their film credits, look them up on the Internet Movie Database. If you start on the Below the Line page, you can simply click through to the film credits of our guests. The 5 films recognized by the Academy for Film Editing this year are Don't Look Up, Dune, King Richard, The Power of the Dog, and Tick, Tick, Boom. We're going to discuss them in that order, and spoilers are possible, so consider this a warning. So let's start by talking about Don't Look Up, film editor Hank Corwin.
Where would you like to start? Because I had some issues with this movie.
And Amy, I did too. So
I have a lot of issues with this movie.
Yeah.
I mean, Hank Corwin he's like a tremendous editor. And I think, this film had a lot to say and too much, like in the second act, it was just so long. It just didn't need to be as long as it was. I mean, like my favorite part of the film was like the last 25 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. And that just kind of like the beginning and the end. And so the middle was a problem for me. And I really do feel like I love the way Hank, I like the way he and Adam McKay tell a story, like their other films together are really good. Like The Big Short was a great film in the way it was told. And it was told, through editing, a lot of it. I just had some real story issues, and that kind of, it wrecked the film for me in that way. I wish I liked it more. And I just felt like it got bogged down in the middle, and that's editing. So,
Yeah, Amy, you raised some really great points, because I think one thing just to put up front, as editors, we are colored by our subjective feeling as we watch a movie. And so then what happens is I watch the movie and I'm not enjoying it as much as I might like. I start trying to pick apart the editing and figure out, well, why do I feel like it's not working? And Amy gave a good description of why. I think the one thing I would say is if there was an award for best variety in editing in one movie, this one would win it, because there's so many different styles thrown in here that it's kind of amazing on a technical level. It partly feels like The Morning Show. It partly feels like a sci-fi, disaster movie. It partly feels like a slapstick comedy. Partly feels like a satire. Then there's these moments of drama, particularly towards the last 20 minutes, Amy, that I think you enjoyed. And it's just so many different styles. And it's really impressive that Hank could pull that off as an editor. But I also think that's the film's weakness, that it just does not hold together. It's just so uneven to me. And I wasn't sure what movie I was really in. So I know there's people who love this movie, but I don't think Amy and I were part of that.
no, and I was looking forward to it. I loved Leo DiCaprio, everybody in it was pretty great. I didn't like Meryl Streep, but I didn't like her character, so maybe that was it. But it's just too much was going on. It just was too much, and it verged on bloated, self-righteous. I don't want to say that, because but that was the storytelling. It was kind of trying to knock you over the head. Social media, television, this, that, it could have been streamlined. It was just, he did a great job in trying to weave all of the styles of the movie together, but I just feel like it got bogged down in the middle with some of the unnecessary stuff.
I've heard the filmmakers compare it to Dr. Strangelove a little bit, which is a tough comparison, right? And maybe I'm not doing it a favor by bringing that up, but it reminded me of it in terms of like, what it was trying to do and what it was trying to say. It's just that Doctor Strangelove had such a unified genius vision to it. And this one didn't. Like, again, if you think of Meryl Streep and Leonardo DiCaprio, like they're not in the same movie. So when they show up in the same scene, I'm just confused.
It's really confusing.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, come on, the thing with Ron Perlman, it was just Doctor Strangelove. I mean, it was just stolen from Doctor Strangelove. So...
I don't actually know anyone that does love this movie, Chris, so I'm not sure who those people are. Apparently somebody does, because it is getting more attention than I thought it really deserved. But you do bring up a point that I want to ask you guys about, not necessarily even just about this film, but compared to a lot of our technical categories where you can pull out the elements that are being judged, with editing, how the story unfolds and sort of the enjoyment of the film itself is relevant, because editing is a big tool about making that work.
Yeah, and there's a tradition of like the best film category overlapping with best editing. I think this year's a little weird because of, I don't know why, but generally the winner of the best editor is also often the winner of the best picture. And it just goes to show, I think, how important editing is to storytelling, right? You're touching almost every aspect of filmmaking. There's cinematography, there's the acting performance, there's the script and storytelling. And there's sound and music. I mean, all these elements actually get touched and affected by the editor. So it is actually hard to pull it apart sometimes because the editor has a lot of control over allowing these other crafts to come in or using the best parts of them.
I agree. It's like, it's editing. No editing. I just, so many films are so long these days, and I do not understand. I really don't. I mean, you'll see me on Twitter saying, bring back the 100-minute movie. But because I miss them, the economy of like, there were plenty of films here that could have been told in 100 minutes, easy. It's just, yeah. So anyway, we'll keep talking about that.
Well, that'll take us to the second film on our list, Dune, film editor Joe Walker.
I loved Dune. I did. Now this is a movie that couldn't be told in 90 minutes. I mean, they tried that once and it failed miserably.
Yeah.
I mean, that was David Lynch's version was the condensed version of Dune, and it failed. And this was the epic. This was the book that you read when you were a kid. This was it. This was the whole package. And I really was just like wrapped. It was emotion, it was action, it was storytelling.
And I think, Amy, to your point too about runtimes, like the decision to cut it in half, and this is like half the book basically, was genius because it didn't feel long. Like, it was precisely what was so amazing about it. It's like it told so much story, but it kept moving and it kept pushing forward. And even when the shots were longer and more epic, I didn't feel like the forward motion of the story was getting bogged down unnecessarily. So it was a really amazingly done as an editor, amazingly handled.
Yeah.
The other thing I liked about it, and this is again my personal, like what I look for in films and editing, is the balance of like personal characters with the bigger story, right? So it's like you see Dune, you're like, okay, it's a space opera, like you're expecting the big action scenes, but the editing really paid attention to the Timothée Chalamet character, Paul Atreides, and really like brought me in internally psychologically, and that juxtaposition of like one character and being inside their head, and then this bigger historical threat to him and his people. Really, I find that interesting in film when they can pull that off, because it does all the best parts of cinema and it balances them. So I sort of look at the editing and like, how did they do that? And really want to tip my hat to Joe Walker, the editor, for pulling that off, because a lot of the scenes were structured around being inside Paul's head. He had these visions, and then these visions tie into these bigger set pieces that are kind of coming in sort of the space opera aspect of it. So being able to balance those is really tough.
It was so well balanced. Just thinking of like all of the sequences in his head and how that played. And then like when you got to, actually meeting Zendaya, like, it was like, okay, this story is just moving forward. And I was just blown away by how measured everything was and how well it worked. You know, like I'd forgotten a lot of the plot of the book too, and just the whole thing. I just really was taken by the whole thing. I really was. And I'm usually not like the epic movie fan, and I really just got sucked in. I mean, I like Denis Villeneuve's films. I really am a fan. And he's like the one epic storyteller who I do love. So maybe that's it. He just really knows how to spin a, futuristic yarn.
Yeah, there's nothing wasted. Yeah.
And Joe Walker and Denis Villeneuve had a relationship. Sicario, Arrival, Blade Runner 2049. This is an ongoing relationship between the two of them.
Yeah. And that's a big deal. They have a language. They understand each other. They understand the story. I mean, this was planned out, and it was just really well done, and loved it.
Yeah. Besides the visions, the other thing I just want to talk about, just on a micro level for a second, the scene with the hunter killer. It's this little like drone thing that's left behind. Yeah. Spoiler, but it's left behind. It's like a booby trap on this desert land, the Dune world, and just the like tension that Joe Walker was able to like milk out of this scene. It's technically so brilliant because he's like using foreground and background and changing the shots, and
he's like hiding behind that thing, and I mean, that little drone thing.
Yeah.
And it came out of nowhere. Like, you just didn't expect it.
Yeah. And like, there's nothing wasted in this film. Like, as you point out, like the visions pay off and add meaning to things, little details, like there's like a side with a gardener. I'm like, why are we watching and talk to the gardener? But then later on, the trees,
yeah,
burning, and like everything pays off, and it all feels very economical and yet has bigger meaning. It's just really powerful to watch.
Now, what do you guys think about the complaint that's coming from some quarters that it is only the first half of a larger epic, and therefore you got to see the whole thing before you can really judge the work?
I disagree. If you're telling the story of Dune, sure, it's missing a giant part, but I didn't want to sit through a 6-hour movie. I'm ready for part 2 for sure, but like, I'm happy to wait now.
I'm not happy to wait, which I think is a good time. I'm very impatient. But
I mean, I'm waiting.
Right. I want to see the next part now, but I do feel like it was a great place to end, because if you're just looking at the story of Paul Atreides, like that's a big moment that it ends on. I won't give that away, but it felt complete as a story about him and him growing up. So I am really excited to see the next part, but I think that was a really clever choice because it made the movie economical without an epic, but not bloated. So
no, it's like this story's getting started. Like, like the whole backstory and all of that, like, there you go, and it was well told.
I agree with you guys as well. You guys answered exactly correctly. Thank you for reinforcing that idea. That was the
no controversy.
I mean, I even like all the casting. It was just so good. Like even Dave Bautista and it was so good. And Javier Bardem and Stellan Skarsgård. He's like,
I mean, I think it's notable in this film is that they didn't just film part 1 and then roll into part 2. They didn't know for sure they were going to have a part 2. Obviously, it's set up for that, but they didn't start filming part 2 until this was released and got the feedback, and they got the green light for the second half. So I think they were making a complete movie here. If they hadn't, this movie would still stand on its own as an epic, as you say.
I mean, I would be like, oh, maybe someday there'll be a sequel, but I mean, I would have been happy. It's like, he's going to go live in the desert. They're going to have adventure, but Zendaya would have had to show up a little sooner. And not just in his visions, but yeah.
Well, let's talk about the third film on our list. That'd be King Richard, film editor Pamela Martin.
I enjoyed this movie. It was a biopic, and I lived in Los Angeles in the 90s and remember when, Venus Williams was coming up, and I totally remember this whole story. And I do feel like it got a little taken advantage of because the story of their dad is a little harsher in real life, but I really enjoyed this. I mean, it was kind of a feel good movie for me. I like tennis. I like, but again, like the last 20 minutes were super compelling. When she's finally allowed to play tennis in the pro, match. And she totally gets played, and it's really great filmmaking and editing. Pam's really good with tennis. It's like she's not a stranger to editing tennis. So I don't know. I really loved Mom. I thought it was, it was a well-told story. Best editing, I don't know. That's what I don't know. I'm kind of like,
So I mean, one thing I like to do is get on this podcast. It's now my third year here, which can't believe, but I like to look at like sort of big patterns, like, what is it about these films that they share in common? Because it seems like a pretty random collection on one level.
It is a little to me.
Yeah, right. But from an editing point of view, I sort of like had to sit back this morning and like, what's in common? I think what they all do really well, even Don't Look Up, is edit for performance.
Yeah.
That the editors have done a really amazing job pulling out fantastic acting performances. And I don't think there's a better example than King Richard. Like it just lets Will Smith play. And as Amy points out, like, characters that might in other movies might be kind of supporting characters, don't get as much dialogue or screen time, but really you get in their heads and the point of view. And I really found myself rooting for his wife and enjoying her perspective and what she was bringing to the table.
Yeah, it was really good. Like she's amazing.
Yeah, and I feel like the editing was helping that. Right?
No, Pam's really good at that. She really, like, the emotional journey of every one of those people, including like the 3 other kids that, were just supposed to do well in school, like, support their sisters that are on this path where there's a plan. It was really well told, and just the frustration of like everyone who encounters them and like his protectiveness, and you get it, and it's interesting too, because it's like we all know what happened. It's like, right. Serena Williams is the greatest tennis player in the history of tennis. It's like, for me, and her sister, paved the way too, and it's just it's a great story on its own, and I really did enjoy it. I did a lot. It was the editing of the performances and that mom, and bringing all of that around, like the emotional, bringing the neighbor across the street. It's like all of that stuff was really important. All of the guys in the hood and all of that stuff, you throw like, why are we, and it's like, no, it was really important because that was part of their adversity of like getting the freaking hell out of there.
And then the other thing that I kind of see tying these movies together besides performance is rhythm, right? Yeah. We already touched on sort of like the length of the movies, and to me it's like sort of the unifying rhythm of them. And obviously in this movie you've got the tennis playing and the tennis matches themselves, like that, is that well done technically? And I think it really does stand out. It's just absolutely so powerful, right? It's like you're kind of rooting for Venus and and her sister when she's playing, and it just brings you inside the game. It really makes the game tense and understandable. However, the one thing I would say about this movie, like from an editing point of view, is I felt it was way too long. I felt like, again, this like 100-minute goal, I just felt like there were a lot of sequences that could have just been done more economically. Like the traveling in the RV. I got it after a few seconds, and it seemed like I don't know why it was so long. And
I encounter this in editing television a lot. It's like, the rule of threes with like a writer, and like the whole, like, we need 3 scenes to cover blah, blah, blah. No, you don't. It's like, I didn't need, 3 scenes with the guys at the park. I didn't need, a lot of that. Yeah. It again, it comes to storytelling, and you're just being a little more economical in the end does help it. It was long. Like after an hour, I was kind of like, okay, they need to get to Florida.
Right. I know where this is going. Right? Both from history and
I know from my own knowledge where this goes, and I want to get there a little sooner.
Get there. Yeah, exactly.
Because it makes you feel, yeah.
You both talked about the tennis sequences and the way they were handled being really well done in this film. Could you talk a little bit about the challenge of getting a sequence like that from the page to the screen from an editor's perspective?
Probably from the page. It was probably like those tennis matches were probably like an eighth of a page, or like they play tennis, blah blah blah, and and then Pam gets the footage, and it's like hours.
Yeah.
And so it's such a challenge. It's such a challenge to like flesh out, like what dialogue there is, and he's trying to teach them, and and even just like at the end with that big match, that was a mental thing too, because you had to get inside her head, and you were like, when she was being abandoned on that court, by Aranza Sanchez, and she was like, whoa, like what's happening? And you realize what's happening. And that's really hard. It's really hard to do.
And not only are there's so much footage, but there's also so many camera angles, right?
So many cameras.
Again, it's choosing like, how do you put those camera angles together, both to show the pace of the game, which has its own pace, but also, as you point out, to show the psychology of the characters playing it and the people watching it. Like, when do you cut to the audience? In some scenes you've got the father inside separated.
But he can't watch his kids' matches because he's so nervous. And I love that. And it was like, I know that feeling, where you're just like, I can't watch, I can't be near it, I can't stand next to it, I can't, and then just cutting between him and then like observing and him telling people stuff. That was so good, Yeah.
So the when of all that is super impressive what the editor's doing. It really can change how that scene plays and how it works. But they worked. It's super tense, and you just want to know what's happening next, and you want to see her play, and it's just balancing the athleticism and the shots that show that with the audience and the emotion. It's pretty cool. No,
and if you understand tennis, it's like so much of it is just like your nerves and your head, and like, oh, I missed that, and oh, that, and it's like, there were the sequences earlier in the film where like she was losing, and she just like turns around and gets her mean face, just like taking that like little breath and like getting inside that space of hers, and then she turns around and she like kicks her ass, and that was really good.
Or little details like when her opponents sort of get down on themselves for not winning.
Yeah.
And like Vicario at the end does the same thing for a while, and it's like all these little callbacks. And again, like, when did she use that shot? And it's exactly the same shot as before we saw at a sort of tennis club in a junior match. And
yeah.
Nice little setups.
It was, that filmmaker is very good. He's a good director. It was well done, and it was a well done movie. Really, I like those girls a lot. And as a friend, another editor friend, she's like, a little too much giggling, but it was really good. It's really hard editing kids. It's just like, I can't imagine like having 5 of them in one scene. It's so hard. Because they're all distracting each other, and they're all, and I'm sure Will Smith is there messing with them, and it's so hard, and it's just, yeah.
And if there's no breath, you can't cut. That's really difficult.
Oh my God. All of them in one shot. It's like.
I wouldn't have thought about that, the challenges with kids specifically.
Oh my God, so many challenges. So many. Anytime you see a scene with kids, and it just, no. It was, some kids are amazing. A lot of kids just need a lot of work. And so, I'm there to help, but it's like, I'm here for you, kids.
Well, there were fewer kids in our 4th film. That would be The Power of the Dog. Film editor, Peter Sebaris.
This was my favorite movie of the year. It was. I love Dune, but I love this movie more. It was, I just loved it. I was shocked by it. The editing in this film, it's like the world's slowest movie. And it's like the screw is being turned like every second, every minute. And I was hiding my face behind a pillow at certain times and nothing was happening. Like, but there's so much happening. And it blew my mind, the editing in this film. The performances, like it was truly the whole package. It snuck up on me that I'm glad I didn't know anything about it going in, except that it was Jane Campion, who I love. And that was it. And I was blown away.
Yeah, every aspect of filmmaking was firing in this movie, and the editing balances it all out really well. I mean, it's just that sense of foreboding and of danger without actually showing violence. It was like, how on earth did they manage to manufacture that? And it's editing.
It's editing. And I had friends who like turned it off. Like they were like, it was going to get really violent, and I was like, it doesn't. And they're like, you're kidding me.
Right.
I was like, you can thank the editor.
And again, like just bringing out the performances of the actors. What shots are chosen, when it's silent. I mean, again, a lot of it is silent and very kind of epic feeling, but again, imbued with a lot of meaning and a lot of threat and a lot of tension between characters without dialogue. And again, it's very, partly the cinematographer, partly the director, obviously, but the editor managed to balance that and make it work. And just amazing work all around.
Really amazing. The actors, Kirsten Dunst and just that part that she played where she was just so miserable and you just felt like every fiber of her being. And that's just, the editor found that, I mean, she's great, but he really just drew it out. And it was just great filmmaking. I think that I was so blown away at the end, so blown away. I high-fived my wife when it was over. I was like, oh my God.
But if you go back to this question of rhythm, I think you talked about it, Amy. It's it seems on its face like a really slow movie, right? You've got these big, wide, open shots, long takes, but it didn't drag. It didn't feel overly long. And so again, there's something about the understanding of rhythm from the editor that I found really impressive, because it was taking these kind of risks of pushing what we're looking at and how long we're with the scenes. But overall, it just kept moving forward and kept you tense and sort of with the characters.
Yeah. It was a masterpiece. Yeah,
I also really like this film, but it is interesting that there are many people who don't think it's moving along. And we've talked about how it is moving along, but some people it doesn't resonate with. And I'm curious, is there more than editor can do to make it more accessible? Or is there something about folks are just seeing a certain mindset, this film's just not gonna resonate with them?
This kind of film isn't for everybody. I mean, it really is. It's arty, I mean, it's a Western. So they're
and there's a mystery kind of aspect to it.
There is
building suspense. I guess I'll call it not mystery, but a suspense aspect, what's going to happen. Who's going to get hurt. We have this impending sense of violence. Something's going to go.
Yeah.
You don't know who and who's going to do it and when, right? So if you're not on that ride, then you're kind of not as interested, I guess, not as invested.
Yeah. I thought that was it's not an easy sell. I'm for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
some people see it as slow.
Yeah, I have to say, I think my one quibble with it, and I don't know if this is an editorial issue or just something else, it's just the ending, what, in service of what? I feel all of this great filmmaking and this great acting, this great editing, and this great cinematography, it was in service of what takeaway, right? There was a mystery kind of at the end, but I just didn't love kind of what the bigger message of the movie said, which is if you're closeted, you might be violent.
Well, I mean, this is, yeah.
So that to me is kind of undercuts so much of it. And it's okay, well, if you don't buy where it's going, then what's the point of all this great work? Is maybe the question.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I don't know if that's probably a minority opinion, but that was just my
no, it's a very good point. It's a very good point. I guess I really just got drawn into the whole story. I mean, quickly I figured out who the hell Bronco Henry was, but it, like, you know, to Benedict Cumberbatch's character. But I can see what you're saying. Yes, very much. You know, yeah. At the end, it's like, what is it? It's like, okay, well, he took care of that problem.
Right. Exactly. Right. To what end? Right.
To what end?
Yeah.
And they all lived happily ever after.
Right.
I can see that.
As an aside, I like you guys having a little bit of a difference of opinion. I mean, I will try to edit it to bring that tension out.
Sure.
When I'm working on the audio for this one, but
no, but I mean, it's like but he makes a very good point. It's like it like at the end, yes, and they all lived happily ever after. I mean, I don't, you know, it's still a masterpiece to me, but it's like, yeah.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. Like, I just feel like the technique is so good, and I really enjoyed the ride. The day after, I was like, well, you know, what was it really saying? And like, could it have said anything different? I don't know. It's hard with a sort of a reveal like that because so much was built into revealing certain things at the end, and you know, that pushes you towards a certain takeaway of the movie, I guess.
No, and it's based on a book too. I mean, it's like you know, the literary version of it. It's like you can't veer from that. What could you do to make that different? That's always a dilemma.
And it's set in the past.
Way in the past, and then, you know.
So it's a certain portrayal of the American West, you know, and it's like, it's interesting. It's certainly tackling like some great issues, you know, sort of tackling closeted people in the American West in the early 1900s, and like that leads to a lot of tension. So
yeah,
lots of great questions raised.
It's not Brokeback Mountain where it's like, you know, it's not, but but yeah, anyway.
The other thing quickly to talk about, actually, which is interesting, is like how music is used in some of these movies, which we haven't really touched on it yet. But
it's true.
Again, it's like the editor's responsibility to give music time to play, right? To like for the score to do what it needs to do.
Yeah.
And actually going back a movie for a second, like I feel like Dune was probably to me the most successful of all these movies in terms of harnessing its score to add emotion. And like Hans Zimmer obviously was doing that score. He's pretty talented, but the editor, you know, when we're editing, we're often using a temp scores. We don't exactly know what the score is going to be. So we create space for that music, and without it, the film scoring person can't do their job. So I feel like Power of the Dog also did a really good job of being silent at certain times and letting sound design and music drive this tension that we were feeling. And again, I love when an editor has the foresight to take those pauses and know that they're going to be supported by the other parts of the team.
Yeah, it is. It's a delicate balance. And I mean, Dune was like Hans Zimmer. I mean, some of the score was kind of relentless. Like it was nonstop there for a while. And I was like, I would have been fine just with like the wind or like whatever. But I get it, because they were world building and it's a whole different kind of storytelling. But yeah, Johnny Greenwood's score in Power of the Dog was super powerful. Like there were moments where it was just like the wind and the grass and horses and cows and then there was, the loneliness of like being out there, with nobody. And it was very interesting. Yeah. Giving it lots of room. It was, that's a good point.
And how music played like itself in the narrative, in the story, and how the editor dealt with that, right? So one of the main characters is sort of playing piano, and she's a little unconfident about her piano playing. And then Benedict Cumberbatch's character is playing the banjo or something like upstairs. And
banjo.
It's just like I've never seen a relationship play out in music quite that way.
So tense.
Yeah, his power from upstairs, like kind of beating her down. It's like it's pretty crazy and pretty, again, just incredibly well edited way to play music into the narrative and let it play out. So yeah, nicely done.
I also want to take this opportunity to plug the podcast. Those who are interested in score, 3 of these films actually are nominated in that category as well. Besides Dune and The Power of the Dog, Don't Look Up, for better or worse, is going to get a conversation on that. And later this week, I'll have folks back and we'll be talking about score. So, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that one. That one will be next. Next on our list for film editing, our fifth film, Tick, Tick, Boom, film editors Myron Kirstein and Andy Weisblum. Also a plug for the podcast. Last December, Myron and Andy were guests on the show, and we talked about this film. If you're trying to find it, season 9, episode 12.
So, I mean, this is an interesting one, right? So we're talking about the editing category specifically. And, I think maybe this movie cheats a little bit because like in the title of the movie, Tick, Tick, Boom gives you the sense of like an editing rhythm. And it really kind of sums up what what the editors were dealing with in this movie. And they really artfully went between music and something that's more of straight up drama. And I think in less capable hands and less technically efficient hands, like that would be really confusing. But somehow I got sucked into the movie and again into Andrew Garfield's performance through the music. So I really feel like this was a pretty technically challenging and amazingly well edited movie from an editing point of view, of just going from subjectivity, from one guy on a stage to full scenes and back again, and really never confusing me about where I was or either emotionally or narratively. So pretty impressive stuff from an editing point of view.
No, it was truly very well done. I was not a fan of this film. I'm not like a huge musical theater type person. And this film is about like musical theater. The editing, however, if it wasn't for the editing of this movie, it would have failed even like just on its face. It would have fallen on its face because they just did the best job of tying all of his worlds together. It's like the diner, the stage, his home life, like everything was there. And I felt it was too long. There could have been like, again, that second act could have been fleshed out a little, just a little bit, like maybe one less song. I get that it was about a musical, and we're talking about length again. I just felt like this film was too long, even in its masterful job of like bringing all of Jonathan Larson's worlds together and the story of Tick, Tick, Boom. I just got a little bored. I got bored. And that's not good. Sadly.
I had the same reaction, Amy. I mean, I got it. Like, he's a struggling poor writer. And I understood that really pretty quickly. But it felt like there were so many scenes making that point over and over again. And again, I don't know if that's because there's certain songs they had to get to from the original musical, but I really enjoyed the latter half and sort of when it became personal for him. And, he's sort of battling friends with AIDS and sort of becoming an inspiration to him and also just such a mental drag on him. So those sort of scenes were really interesting because that was something different.
No, it was personal. It was like emotional.
Yeah, it was emotional. Exactly.
And I can deal, and I relate to that.
Yeah.
It's like, that was something I could relate to. It's like seeing his friends dying. And this was like, it's what propelled him to write a musical later about people dying, and trying to make your rent. And like, it was kind of, that was the really interesting part to me. And I just, maybe I do have a bias against like musicals. I generally like them. I don't know. But this one, I just was kind of like, he wasn't the greatest person. He wasn't like, he had a tragic early death, and that's part of his like, whole tragic story. So, he was cut off way too soon. And it's like, but yeah, it was bogged down, and that was my one giant problem with it. It just went on too long. But I just really feel like Andy and Myron and Andy did a great job, because but the fact that it got bogged down is a problem, and probably what cost it like Best Picture. These are the things that like some of these movies that didn't get nominated for Best Picture. It's like that, it got bogged down.
And that is, again, sort of I'm talking about with rhythm, right? And rhythm editing. It's like we're looking at micro scenes and skips where we talked about earlier about like the technical skills of individual scenes. Like tennis is amazing, or cutting to these musical numbers and making one guy with a piano on stage work. Like that's a technical skill that's kind of amazing to see them handle that so well. but there's also the big picture of storytelling, and the editor is there with the screenwriter and with the director, and it's really their responsibility to kind of keep the plot moving forward and sort of understand how the audience is going to respond to that movie. And Amy and I both feeling the same thing, it seems like, in a couple of these movies. I'm like, boy, I just wish they started this one later, compressed that first act. But we just quickly talk about the diner sequence. Like, there's a very famous sequence in this movie that just was amazing, and it's
the Sunday sequence,
number.
or no, where it opens up.
Yeah,
that was great.
Again, just the editing. I feel like the editing propelled that sequence so well.
No, it was really good.
Yeah,
I mean, it was good, and I wanted like more of that, a little bit.
Me too.
But it was, Sunday at the diner. I mean, it was just so well done, and Joel Grey going check.
Yeah.
But like the Hedwig thing of like the front of the diner opening up, and I loved that. It was so cool, and that I liked that a lot.
Yeah. So again, when we look at sort of technical, why is this movie nominated? You start looking at sequences like that, and it's obvious. It's just so well handled, from every level. But we can point to the editing and say, without a good editor, that sequence might not have been as enjoyable as it really was.
Yeah. So. No, and Myron, he's he's Mr. Musical guy now. I've known Myron for a long time, so it's I'm just so happy for him. To get recognized for something that he did a tremendous job. I mean, it's tremendous pulling this story together. I just wish it had been a little shorter, you know, that's all.
And it seems simple, but it's just not,
it's just not. You've
got, so much, especially again, this is structured around songs, it's particularly difficult. It's do you say, I'm going to drop a song that some of the audience is expecting? I probably wouldn't have noticed because I don't know.
Because I don't know Tick Tick Boom, so I don't know. And musicals drop songs all the time in their film portrayals, so I don't know.
But there's a lot of stakeholders, I'm sure, sort of pressuring you on various directions. But
it's so hard filmmaking. I know, and I think about all of the people involved, But I want it. But I like that scene.
Right.
And I'm always the one going, but do we need it?
Exactly. That's the editor's job. It's ask that tough question.
I ask the question all the time.
We all do.
You need that?
Yeah. That's why they hire us, because it's, as a director. I mean, I wear multiple hats, so I know we get so emotionally attached as the director and screenwriter to this material. So you really lean on your editor to help you understand where you've kind of overgone your boundaries and where you don't need this to tell your story, and the audience might not stay with you. So that's precisely what you've got to really rely and trust your editor to tell you. And that's what that relationship should be about.
Well, the Oscars recognized 5 films and the ones we've discussed, but tell me if there was anything else from last year that impressed you with its editing.
This is a weird one. And there's another movie that I really, really love. And, I'm also, I spent a lot of my time doing documentary editing, so I'm going to do a push here for documentaries. But this movie, Flea.
Flea!
Yeah, it seemed unusual for editing because it's both a documentary and it's animated, right? So, when is that going to get nominated for an editing Oscar? But let me tell you, as I watched it, I just kind of knew intuitively, the editor had a lot to do with that movie. And I actually made me want to go and look up, how did they do this movie? Because I was curious. And it started with a series of audio interviews with the main subject, who's a guy who's fleeing Afghanistan. I don't want to give too much away, but please go and see this movie if you can. It's streaming. But this guy's fleeing Afghanistan, and it's his personal recollection of his story, his family story about getting out of Afghanistan and ending up in Western Europe. And the director started with audio interviews and gave it to his editor, and the editor cut it together, I think, more as a traditional documentary at first, and then they started animating it because they wanted to keep this person's identity a secret so he could continue living his life in the West. And it just was this iterative process, but the end result is just such editorial control. It's so well put together. It's exactly the right pace. The rhythm is amazing.
It's 89 minutes long.
It's 89 minutes long, but it's so deep. You get
it's all there.
It's all there. It's epic. It's personal. I was crying at the end of this movie, and so I just want to tip my hat to the editing of that movie. unbelievably powerful in a very difficult medium of documentary and animation combined, right? So
I nominated it. I'm in the Academy, so I nominated Flea. It was one of my nominations. Yeah.
Thank you.
It was, because it's the whole package.
Yeah.
I've said that a few times about movies here, but it's so good.
Yeah. And so well edited. So
yeah,
you might not expect it, but man, that was really powerful editing.
Other movies, let's see. Yeah. What I'm trying to think. Oh, The Worst Person in the World. I liked that movie.
Amy, when you're thinking about movies you want to nominate, I mean, how much of it is like just your like gestalt of like, I like this movie, I enjoyed watching it, and how much are you like looking at the technique and the craft?
A lot of it is like, if I can remember like how much I enjoyed watching it. I mean, it gets me thinking about my vote. There were a lot of films that I enjoyed, last year. But that's what kind of gets me. And I remember, but Flea stuck out as like, but I really like to drive my car, and that's like 3 hours long. So, but it's a meditation on grief, and it's like, so things like that. I just love movies like that. Yeah.
And The Worst Person in the World, I haven't seen it yet, and we're not going to give any spoilers on that one anyway. But what was it about the editing that folks should watch for when they do get a chance to see it?
It's just a good story. I don't know. It just, I was in rapture of the whole story. It's a foreign film, and it was just I just enjoyed it. I mean, it's best editing, I don't know, but I got caught up in the whole story. Yeah.
The other one I would mention that was like kind of on my short list was Licorice Pizza, which again, it's like a hard to pull apart, like what's the script, what's the acting, what's the editing in that one. But there's some really fun sequences that I think like feel like a period piece music video almost. And I think that stuff propelled the movie forward. And that again is the editor. I assume it's the editor is really taking the lead on that. It's like, how do we make this more propulsive and more dynamic, visually?
I'm not a huge fan of Paul Thomas Anderson films. I'll just say that. And I really enjoyed Licorice Pizza. And I think it was just because it was just a story that just followed its own rhythm. And I did nominate that for best editing, and it didn't get nominated. But I really just loved like the whole vibe of that film. Like the teenage years, the Valley in the 70s. It just, I don't know, maybe because I've worked with Gary Getzman, just seeing it play out as a kid. It was kind of like my weird, like inside baseball kind of like, whoa.
It all made sense suddenly.
It finally all made sense.
Yeah, I'm surprised it wasn't nominated. Like I think that seems to me like kind of an obvious one that maybe should have been on there, but
it was long, and I mean, it was a lot of shots of them running.
Yes,
it's the running movie.
No. The running movie is still Last Night in Soho. Movie is all running.
That's the running. That is all running all the time, and I sadly was not fond of that film. I wanted to like that movie more.
But you're right. There was a lot of running in this one as well.
Running towards each other, running away from each other, running.
Filmmakers out there, limit your running sequences unless you're prepared to fire, please.
In talking about all these films, we've sort of made the point about that collaboration between the writer and the director and the editor and trying to bring a story to life. With that in mind, talk to me a little bit about the Academy's recent decision not to air the awarding of this trophy on the actual ceremony.
It's a bad decision. It just is. They do this like every year. This comes up. Is the show too long? It's like the show is the show. When it's not going to be this thing that you can make into something else. It's the Oscars. You give out awards. It's an award show. Like, it's not about jokes and stuff. I mean, this is the thing. It's like, then put it on a streaming channel and make it 4 hours long, because I want to hear everybody's speeches. It's like, but I'm a filmmaker. To put like best editing before the show in like a package that they're going to play. Like, come on. Like production design, like all of the categories, like give me a break. It's like, do you know how long it takes to like make a short film, like a documentary short, like sound, like all of these categories, they belong in with everybody else. It's just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, I also found this decision really disappointing. It just, I mean, no matter what they end up doing, because we're recording this before the awards, obviously, in an early date, but whatever they end up doing, it just sends this message that these categories that have been relegated to this different treatment are lesser. And it just, I think, as we hopefully have described in this podcast, is like, how important editing is to the storytelling process, to making films, and all of these categories: scoring, production design. I mean, short films, like really hard to make a really great short film. And I don't know, like, what's the point of this award show? Is it celebrating the movies of the year and the filmmakers and trying to help new filmmakers emerge? Or is it just like this vehicle for star power and entertainment?
Or like selling soap. It's like, is this really what it is anymore? Like, no, it's like, get it off of network television then.
Right.
Like, just put it on HBO Max. Like just have it stream live, like whatever.
But isn't the real drama too, like you get to see these different people you normally wouldn't see, and then somebody comes up and gives this amazingly like heartfelt speech. Like that's the stuff I remember. I don't really remember the dance sequence or whatever they think they're gonna fill the time with. And it's too long, but I don't think cutting categories of filmmaking is really the right idea for an award show that celebrates filmmaking.
No, and they're gonna fill it with like, the cheer moment that dates back to 1990, like, when films were invented. What is that? Like, I do not understand. Like, what? Like, who cares? It just is so, like, it's lunacy to me. I don't like your fan favorite film, and it's going to be like the Cinderella with Camila Cabello. Like, great. Like, so a bunch of teenage girls are going to tune in to watch that? Right. I don't think so.
Probably not. And I feel bad for the filmmakers. Like, I mean, can you imagine being an editor? Like, if I was the editor of one of these movies that was nominated and then something happens to me, it's just sort of mind-boggling.
Myron, Pam, like, they're heartbroken. Like, this is not funny. It's like Jermaine Franco, like all of these, like for best score, like they're heartbroken. They feel relegated to second class.
Yeah.
Again.
Just goes to show sort of like what people perceive the place of editing is in the Hollywood firmament, right? Like, editors, I mean, the nice thing about editing is you often are kind of below, like you're sort of swimming below the surface. You're not as much in the spotlight as, say, a director or star actor, but it sort of gives you a certain freedom often to like really do your craft, to do it well. But in cases like this, it's just frustrating because it's, you're reminded that a lot of people don't understand how important these editors are, and they're sort of there hand in hand with the directors and the screenwriters. And if I was a producer, I would want to honor these editors all I can, because they make a huge difference to how these movies turn out.
Yeah, and who's making their show shorter? Who's going to edit those packages of like people getting their awards together? Who, an editor. I mean, this is the thing. I don't get it. I just don't.
Well, we can't promise we're going to have the kind of audience that the award show itself is going to have, but those folks are always welcome to come here on the podcast. We are about showcasing exactly the work they're doing. So, and really appreciated you guys helping to break down these films and give us some insights. As always, thanks so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I had a good time. Yes. I'd like to do it again.
As long as they don't get rid of the award altogether.
We're heading there.
That's definitely. Who cares?
Right. But I'll be really angry.
We'll plan to see you guys again next year. Listeners, that's a wrap. If you'd like to learn more about the podcast, please visit our website, belowtheline.biz. That's B-I-Z. It's easy to peruse past episodes, and you'll find links to all of our social media. That includes our page on IMDb, where, as I mentioned earlier, you can learn more about my guests. Thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and all of you for sticking with us. Please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.